life living and making a living can sometimes wear us out, grind us down, and dull our senses. So for a keen mind and a sharp contributive edge that can make it all easier and better and more productive, let's take some time to sharpen our axe. Stay with us right now for Life Talk.
Hello, I'm Gina Fitt, and you've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk with Bern Moses. Welcome to another in our series of ongoing verbal essays brought to you in this television format. It's a pleasure to have you with us for our program today. Bern, the last few weeks have just flown by so fast. I think we've covered everything about love and relationships and relationships and how to be more powerful with people that are important in our lives, and maybe there's some material we still haven't covered in this area.
Well, I get a lot of questions. I get challenges all the time, and one that's come up in the last, couple of weeks, because, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, we did a show on relationships becoming elationships and the sexual realities, that when people talk about sex, they've got to talk about all the ologies. In other words, I believe we talked about physiology and psychology and theology and all the rest of that stuff. And since then, I've had numbers of people from different perspectives, okay, in other words, from all sides of the fence, say, well, what do you think about this gay issue? Should we have gays in the military? Should there be gay marriages? Should there, this kind of thing. And I think it wouldn't hurt to just discuss it and to tie it in some way to some of the foundational material that we've covered in the past, which has to include life formula. Okay?
Yes.
I mean, that's part of that.
Absolutely.
Because we have come to realize that we are trichotomous beings. Okay? Every human mind on the planet is made up of a subconscious mind, a subliminal, an unconscious mind, a survival mechanism that cannot see, hear, feel, smell, or taste. We have a conscious mind which can remember and reason and make choices, decisions, and we have a conscience that can dictate. And that conscience oftentimes has been influenced, obviously, by our religious training, social mores, the concepts of right and wrong and this type of thing. And all that's just as healthy as it can be. However, whenever something is different, black, red, brown, woman, man, white, tall, short, thin, fat. Whenever there's a difference, there is a chance for what? Aggravation, fear, upset, posturing, opinions, and this type of thing. And certainly gay has to be one of those. Quite frankly, I never heard of the concept. I wasn't conscious at all of homosexuality until I was 18 years old. And as I lived in a community, evidently, where if they were there, they were hiding out, okay, and those were in the closet. And certainly that was commonplace, 50 years ago. When I went into the military, I had my first exposure, and because of my lack of preparation, I think I probably did some posturing about it in order to not be suspected that I might be gay. You know what I mean, how we always take our macho position about it. Didn't have a whole lot of exposure, intermittent, infrequent. I was uncomfortable sometimes with what I heard, the posturings that some people, that, the gay bashing and how they're animalistic and all this kind of thing, and how totally inappropriate it was. And I felt uncomfortable with some of that, but had no solutions. I knew there was a difference there, and I was troubled by it, troubled by what I saw people saying and doing to one another. And so a long time ago, I would say probably as much as 40 years ago, I became conscious of this. And I began to watch and to think and to study and try to understand as much as I could. Because you remember some months ago I said that my daddy told me that I'd be running into people all my life who were expressing opinions to which they were not entitled.
Yes.
Now, they have a right to the opinion because the Constitution gives us that right to make as big a fool of ourselves as we want to. But to have, or to be entitled to an opinion requires some thought and some investigation and some study and maybe some experience. And so I applied myself to that as rigorously as I could or had time for. And there seems to be the big argument, okay, whether this is a choice that a person makes or if it's an orientation. And everything that I've been able to conclude, and I'm absolutely certain of this is no longer an opinion, it's an awareness, okay, and that is it's an orientation. However, as long as there's a segment of our society that can hold on to the fact that it's a choice, then they can continue to be prejudicial and posturing about it. Because if that's a choice, then it's a bad choice, okay? If it's an orientation, then we're compelled to say, you've got to examine this more closely, because can we challenge our orientations? In other words, you're a female, okay? And I'm assuming, that you're sexually oriented. You've been married, have babies, I have no idea. But chances are you're, straight, okay? And I don't know that, but I'm assuming, okay? Can you imagine being any other way?
Right.
Why should that be challenged? And the thing of it is, I'm confident, and I've really thought a lot about it, trying to see if perhaps maybe there is some inclination or orientation in the other direction. But I'm confident over a period of years that I'm heterosexual. Okay, I've got a bunch of kids and grandkids, which doesn't prove a thing, by the way. It doesn't prove a thing. It's an orientation. I can't imagine being another way. Therefore, how do I dare demand that someone else, who obviously by now I've concluded is oriented, how dare I say they must be some other way? Otherwise, they're evil and they're inappropriate and what have you. Now, there's a lot of support for the negative argument. There's a lot of support for that. People look to the Bible and say that it's an abomination and what have you. I know Paul, I think, was one of the major contributors to this attitude. And Paul also said that women should keep quiet. So are we going to buy that too? How do you feel about that one? Absolutely, yeah. And so, in other words, it was Paul that said women should be silent in the church. Okay, so a lot of people are refuting that now because of the intellect that the women are bringing, okay, and the insight and the courage and the love that they can bring into the spiritual world, into the physical, into the business world. It's incredible. And so there may be some intelligent ignorance involved in some of these things based on the conditions of the time. One thing I have found, which is kind of frightening in a way, that some of the most ardent homophobics that I've encountered in my life turned out to be what? Homosexuals. It's just that the fear was so great that they be found out that they were taking a position about it. Mm-hmm. Now, it's been said, and I don't buy this for a second, that any homophobic has to examine his own sexuality because that may be what his problem is. And I think that's unkind to make that general kind of a statement. But I would imagine that there's a percentage of homophobics who indeed are homosexual, who are trying to hide it even from themselves.
Bern, if I could, I'd like to interject one more thing, to stir things up a little bit more. I watched a program on one of the scientific channels the other day, and they were addressing the issue of children who had been born hermaphrodites with both male and female sexual organs intact. Generally at birth, these individuals are given an operation to make them one or the other gender if hormones are required, etc., so that as they grow up, they don't have to struggle with being unusual, odd, and not fitting into society. And it was very interesting. They interviewed several individuals, some who had been, quote, made into women, others had been, quote, made into men. And these people, and of course I don't know how representative this is of everyone who's gone through this experience, but the people that were in this film were still struggling very much with who they were and what they were. And every one of them said, I wish they wouldn't have done anything to me. I want all of my parts. I want to be who I am and who I came here as. And the thing that was really interesting to me observing the program was that they were more androgynous than a typical heterosexual male or female would be. They had more characteristics of both sexes. There was nothing repulsive or in any way negative about that, but you could sense that there was a difference. And it was very heart-wrenching to me to see these people who had had choices taken away from them at birth. And a lot of times with that, there's a lessening of sexual feeling and desire and all that because of the surgeries and things that are performed on them. And I thought, wow, what are we doing? We're trying to force people to be something that they're not.
And you know it's based on fear. And I want this to be normal. And I'm normal, therefore you must be like I am. Yeah, I saw the same show, and the anger that they expressed was pretty obvious. You know, and sometimes that anger, when people get into who you are and what you're about, there is an anger that generates from the fear that's created by that, and you have these in-your-face gays. You know, the ones who are really flamboyant and what have you, and I'm certain that a lot of that is that in-your-face attitude is a fight mode. Now, just as many go into flee mode.
Fear.
Right. See, some of them go into flee, and so they hide out, and some of them freeze up totally. Now, I've known a number of people who were aesthetics. In other words, they had no relationship and no sexual activity in their life until they're in their late 20s, 30s, even 40s. And sometimes, there's one man I met one time who had never identified himself with a man or a woman throughout his whole lifetime. In other words, that's painful. You know, not to have, we're not just talking sex here, we're talking about a relationship, a loving, caring comradeship that would exist between two people. He'd never had that because he did not want to challenge society. He didn't want to be ostracized and criticized and threatened and what have you. And I think it's probably getting more balanced out here. There's more and more people. Well, the fact that more and more people are evidencing that they're gay has become a recruiting effort in the minds of those who aren't. That comes up a lot too. There's the fact that the gays are recruiting people. Well, they couldn't recruit me, and I doubt that they could recruit you. In other words, if you're gay, you're gay. If you're heterosexual, you're heterosexual. And no amount of sociological posturing could recruit you into the other camp. I think a person who is unsure of himself might experiment, but they would go back to their orientation unless they were, like so many, bisexuals. There's a lot of bisexuality, androgynism out here than we would even care to address. There's a lot of that. And I don't know where this is going to head, but I know that we're going to get more and more sophisticated about it. I don't think there's a question that in our future, somewhere down the line, there is going to be recognized relationships between homosexuals where they can enjoy some of the benefits of a relationship. For example, I know two people now. In fact, I know a male couple and a female couple who have been together for years. I mean, years. Good, solid relationships, supportive of one another, face life's challenges together, solve them and what have you. And sex was probably what percentage of their life? Maybe what, 2%, 3%? No, I'm not going to ask you what percentage of your life is engaged in sexual activity, but it's minimal, and so is what theirs. But what they had was this relationship. The fact of the matter is that if one of them becomes ill, okay, say they get cancer or there's a liver problem or they're in a major accident and they're in a hospital, their mate has no influence whatever. Can't make any decisions, sometimes can be kept from visiting them because they're not a spouse. I mean, that's irrational. That is irrational. I've seen other cases where families come rushing in at the time of a death and wouldn't let the other person attend a funeral. You know what I mean? They finally had their way. They disapproved of that relationship, and so now they're going to have their way, and this life is destroyed. That's irrational. I mean, that is not the way it really should be. You understand? And it's no different. I've seen where, for example, a young man and a young woman were living together in a heterosexual relationship. And as I recall, his family objected to that. Okay, they had a specific idea about it. And he was a young pilot in the Navy and was killed. Okay, and she was deprived of any activity in the preparation for his funeral, in the funeral itself, or any of the other activities that occurred. She was just shunted aside. And, by the way, all of his property, everything was taken. So she had no claim to anything. So those kinds of things, you have to have, while you look and say, wait a minute, what's going on? And, there has to be some movement here somewhere. Hawaii is setting a pace. Someone has to. That's going to cause a lot of problems, posturing and what have you. Oh, and about gays in the military. That's fascinating. Can't have gays in the military, even though they've been there from the beginning of time. You know what I mean? They've always been there.
We won't admit it. We
Yeah.
won't acknowledge it.
Now, I'm very quick to say, hey, behavior is another issue. You know what I mean? In other words, whether a person is heterosexual or homosexual is not the issue. Okay, it's how they behave. Now, there's no question that there could be inappropriate behavior from any perspective.
Well, we're getting that in the military as well, inappropriate heterosexual behavior.
Exactly.
So it's more, I think, a matter of us choosing standards and governing values for our own lives than living up to those governing values and standards in our lives and allowing other people the same.
Right.
And if their behaviors are unacceptable to society, they're damaging, or they take away other people's privileges, their freedoms, then we need to address those, as
Take
we
those to
have
task.
traditionally
Exactly.
throughout centuries.
I think one of the biggest things that I see happening that I find appalling is that a high percentage, and I know this is true because I've had too many of them. You see, in the business that I'm in, I have a lot of people flowing through my life, thousands of them, and I've seen these dynamics. And too many times I have seen teenagers who committed suicide because they were gay and they were afraid to be found out. They couldn't accept themselves. They were in a church environment that condemned that vehemently. They heard their father posturing about how gays should just die and that AIDS was a punishment for them. You mean, if you're a gay and you're hearing this and you haven't evidenced it, I mean, where do you go?
You become a blot on the face of the earth.
Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of suicides occur. And then too late, you know, a grieving father said, if I'd have only known, I could have loved him. You know what I mean? In other words, I could have made that adjustment. But as it was, he was posturing and positioning himself and destroying someone. And pretty inappropriate. I know there's some progress in this area because, for example, we have legislators now who are openly gay, and they're being reelected based on what they do, who they are, what their principles of government are, this type of thing. Yeah, we're heading in the right direction, but boy, it's like anything else. It's slow, it's like pulling teeth.
And again, I think it comes back to personal responsibility. Regardless of your orientation, are you responsible in your
Exactly,
relationships?
exactly.
Do you care for the people that you are intimate with? Do you love them? Do you look after their best interests? Or are you selfish? And that applies to any intimate relationships with, regardless of your orientation.
You see, this is not to say I'm not sympathetic with the person who's posturing out of fear. I can sympathize. I can understand how that could happen. But you can't condone it, because that's what it is. It's fear. And if that person, through understanding, could re-perceive that, then their life could be freed up. You know, there's no, I mean, it would be a better place for them to exist. No question about that. I just think it's something that, if we're going to talk about life living and making a living, then some of those kind of things we need to just talk about once in a while so that people know where we're coming from and can really get involved in what we're doing or not as they choose. You know? Do you have anything to add to this?
Boy, well, I know that there's been some people in my life who've struggled with those challenges and have questioned their existence, why they're here, do they have value, will they be accepted by their families, their friends, will they be loved, and do they have a place in the world? Can they make a contribution? And we've talked about on so many of our programs that having a purpose in your life, which involves making a contribution, is essential to a productive, happy life. And I think a lot of times we stifle the ability of people to give when we put them in a box and we label them as bad, inadequate, unacceptable. And we could carry that beyond sexual orientation to other limitations or other challenges or other differences that people struggle with.
I know didn't we talk about racism some week ago? The same kind of principle. I mean, how dare someone say because someone is a different color that they're less? Just unbelievable. I mean, I heard the analogy used the other day. It was quite good, that if a person in their subjectivity hated and wanted to discount and discard, destroy all the gays and all the blacks, you know, then they'd probably have to go after all the women. Then, you know what I mean? Yeah, and
What's
then
left?
what we need to do is to take from their life all that those people have contributed to it. In other words, if you could take all the inventions and all the discoveries and all the great art and all the things that have been contributed to from all this variety of people and let that person be by himself, there wouldn't be much left.
There wouldn't be much left.
There's something, I have to acknowledge that there's something about people in the gay community that causes them to be very creative. I mean, really, it's just amazing. For example, what is it? Michelangelo. I mean, we could go on and on with name after name. Great warriors, great artists, great inventors, great politicians, great leaders who were in that category. And not until later did it come out that they were challenged by that, had that orientation.
Bern, you said something a minute ago that really struck me. We're talking about putting people in categories not as good as. And we talked about, orientation, race, religion. And maybe we can lead into this for a show for another time, because I think that there's a lot here to cover. But what about categorizing people by their talent, their intelligence, their, if they're gifted or not? And so we let's take it a step further. We categorize our children. We put ceilings on their ability to progress by labeling them at a very early age. Gifted, troublesome, ADD, this, that, the other thing. That child is put in a box, and they're not even given the opportunities to be anything but that label that's put on them. And what could they contribute if we would try to see the world from their perspective? Maybe that child who won't sit still sees the world in a way that we really need to see it to grow.
There's something happening in the learning revolution out here internationally. People are beginning to discover that there are probably no bad students. There are uninformed teachers. Not bad teachers, but uninformed, unaware. And that there are so many different ways of learning, and that somehow our modern educators are going to have to become more adept at being able to discover that in children. Knows whether they're kinetics or whether they're visuals or audio people, all those kind of things. For example, I was leading to a point that they found that daydreamers were one thing, that daydreamers should be left alone. And for centuries, I mean, we've punished them and brought them back and say, stop daydreaming. And they found...
Don't let your mind work. Yeah. Don't think great thoughts. Don't put all these different pieces of a puzzle together and give us something more than what we've got now. Just don't do it.
So to open up those minds and let them be where they are. I know one thing, that I get really nervous when I see a young kid labeled, like you say. Les Brown, a cohort, a fellow contributor, if you would, was considered non-teachable, uneducable when he was a young man. And I mean, fortunately, he had a doctor who said, don't you listen, that is not true. And I mean, he began to venture out and to experiment and to experience and become an awesome, awesome person. I don't know if you're familiar with Les Brown or not.
Yes, I am.
He's really made some progress. And it was right in the face of all the educators who said that he didn't have a future. And he was put in the slow classes and this type of thing. So, we have to, I get real nervous about that. Stop it, stop it, stop it. We're going to do a series on stop it. Stop it, stop it.
I think that would be great. And maybe as a prelude to that, we should challenge all the naysayers out there, and possibly ourselves at times, Bern, to every time we want to say something that limits ourselves or others, to turn that statement around immediately and turn it into a you can, I can, we will, it's possible, go for it.
I think, too, that young people should be encouraged, as well as all of us, I guess, to get adamantly defensive about what people say to you. In other words, if someone says something to you, calls you a name, or whatever, if you don't challenge that right then, you do assimilate it. It becomes part of who you are. And people have the right to be militantly adamant about what people say to them. I know that if I came visiting and knocked on your door some night, you would let me in the house. I'm convinced of that. I'd say, hi, Gina. You say, oh, hi, Bern. What do you, and you might be a little awkward for a moment, but you'd invite me in. And as I walked through the door, if I leaned over and I said, just a moment, and I picked up this big garbage can, and I came into your living room, and it just happened to be filled with spoiled meat and maggots and, all kinds of bacteria and, junk, real juicy garbage. And
we get the picture.
Yeah, we get the picture, and I poured it on your living room rug. I think you'd react.
Absolutely.
I think you'd get pretty defensive. What in the world are you doing? Why are you doing this? Get out. And And why wouldn't a person be just as adamant about what people say?
What they put in your
Yeah,
mind.
because it's a lot more important than that bucket of garbage. You know what I mean? The fact that what people say to you, not to challenge it, not to say, wait a minute, no, I'm not going to accept this.
I think we not only need to challenge what people say directly to us, but what people say to us through the media, the programs we watch, the movies we go to, the music we listen to, all the big thinkers of our time, or the big talkers of our time anyway. Maybe we should challenge what they're saying also.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
Challenge everything. Don't take any. Those. As soon as you know something is true, it's probably not. As soon as you believe something, it's probably a lie. You know what I mean? That's just the way it is out here. We've got to stop persecuting ourselves verbally. And I just hope that people will continue listening, because we're going to start going back and reviewing some of the material we've covered. Because I have a dear friend who the other day was so kind. She said that every one of these essays stand on their own 2 feet. You start putting one with the other, and it begins to form a tapestry. They get stronger and stronger and stronger. And by the time you get through the whole series, there's not much left to talk about. That's a pretty nice way of putting it. And so we've covered a broad spectrum of life, living, and making a living. And so now it's time to go back and maybe review some of the key issues. And like we've done the last week or 2 or 3, to begin to apply them to life and living and making a living. Because a lot of times people don't make that shift. They get information and they don't integrate it into their personal lives.
What do I do with this?
Yeah, exactly.
Where do I go from here?
Exactly.
How do I make this work in my life?
But you have found that just by conveying some of this information, it's almost enough to give them the tools to proceed in doing that. So
It gives
that's
me the
what's-
tools. It's interesting how when you learn something and you go out and teach it,
There you go.
then you know how to do it.
I call it actualization.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
hopefully you heard something this evening that you can take to a friend and say, you know, this is what the guy said. What do you think? And then we will be dialoguing. This is Life Talk, and what you need to do is to call us. Go right to the phone and call 1-800-661-3490 and say, hey, I saw the show, I hated it, I loved it, I agree, I disagree, I want to see what else you have to say, send me 2 tickets and don't charge me a dime. You can say that. You know. Just call in, and my name is Bern.
Moses.
Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Vern.